So welcome to day 2 of the virtual village to village network gathering. And I'm going to drop behind the curtain and take it away, Barbara.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2. We're very, very excited of the second day of full day of the National Village Virtual Village Gathering. As Steve said yesterday, was very successful. We're excited today to have a great panel, a wonderful panel of pundits that's going to talk about and have a lively discussion about topics that older adults are facing in the coming years. And to lead the discussion is our favorite host, Bob Blancato, who is a friend of the network and the village movement for years. And we welcome Bob. He's the president of Matz, Blancato and Associates, a government affairs consulting firm. As Steve said, we are going to be taking questions throughout. So don't wait to ask a question in the Q&A. Eddie Rivas and I will be on hand to help Bob and the panel to navigate the questions as they come through. So don't hesitate, don't be shy. Use the chat for chatter like you are doing. Hello, Bob from Sarasota, and we'll start. Bob?
Wonderful, Barbara, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Barbara, for the introduction and your leadership of this wonderful network. It is nice to be back with the Village to Village Network. This is probably my 4th or 5th time of doing it. And I want to thank Steve and Eddie for their work and their help in putting this panel together. And, you know, I also want to thank the 187 participants who are so far in this session. That is a good thing to see. And we're delighted to have you join us. And we hope you will be interactive in your during the course of this session. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a village of friends, okay, my colleagues who will be the panel of pundits for 2022 today. I'm going to go and introduce them all and ask them to, as I do so, to go on camera and go off mute. First, Ramsey Alwin, the President and CEO of the National Council on Aging. Good morning, Ramsey. Karyne Jones, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging. Karyne, good morning. Peter Kaldes, the CEO and President of the American Society on Aging. Peter, good morning. Sandy Markwood, the CEO of the National Associate, actually CEO of US Aging, get proper name, update myself here. And then finally, Katie Smith Sloan, President and CEO of LeadingAge. Good morning to my friends and my colleagues. So let's begin with pretending we're professors for the moment, okay? So if you're going to give a grade to the Biden-Harris administration on their work so far on behalf of older adults, what would it be and why? And as the longest tenured panel of pundit person, I'm going to ask Karyne Jones to lead this one.
Of course. Because this is going in March, it'll be my 20th year at NCBA. So yeah, I've been around a while.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. What kind of grade would I give the Biden-Harris administration? I think at this point, I'd give them a B. Obviously, I'd like for them to speak more to aging issues. However, I know within Inflation Reduction Act, with their rollout immediately on addressing COVID, just numerous things, you know, they're protecting the Affordable Care Act. I could go on and on of things that they have done. I just would like to see a little bit more discussion or attention brought to aging services. But overall, just bringing some sanity back to the leadership of this country. I will give them a B+.
Okay, we keep talking, it might go up to A-, right? We're lucky so. So Sandy.
All right. Well, and Karyne, I've been at US Aging 20 years too, so we both have an anniversary this year. It's exciting. Well, I'll go for the A-, and part of that is the effort that's been put in. You know, the focus, they came out swinging on supporting Medicare, Medicaid, HCBS services. Now, we didn't quite get over the finish line, but the fact that the president came out and asked for $400 billion really started to raise the discussion about Medicaid, HCBS, and focusing in on direct care workers, and also championing increases in Older Americans Act. There is certainly, Karyne, I completely agree with you, more that needs to be done. But I also want to shout out for Allison Barkoff, who's been acting as Assistant Secretary, and the relationship she's built with other federal agencies around aging and disability.
Thank you. Peter?
So I share the strong grade, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and a hello to so many of our ASA members that are also Village members, a part of the network. Look, here's why I gave them the A. It's partially because they don't know it. And what I mean by that is legislatively, we've seen them do historic investments in digital inclusion efforts, offering internet subsidies from the FCC, on climate, expanding accessible tax credits and home rebates for folks. Administratively, others have mentioned simply having the president talk about our issues in such an elevated way, in such a pronounced way, elevated the issue in a way that we hadn't seen before. I'll give you another example. They've pushed just about every agency to focus on equity. And even the International Trade Commission, which is a federal agency that works on imports and exports, held a hearing on how older adults are impacted by unfair trade. So my point is they get a great, strong A, but they don't know that they're doing it on behalf of older adults. And I think we could do a better job of reminding them.
I have a quick insert. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you're the boss. You're the boss. Go ahead, lady.
Okay. When you're using, I'm so DC and you guys are too, when you're using acronyms, can you please tell everybody what they are?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that.
In the chat. Yep.
All right, we're going to lower that grade in terms of the answer, you know. So, Katie.
Well, I would agree with all of my colleagues. Strong grade. And, you know, I really agree with Peter that we're talking about these issues like we haven't before. There's a recognition that older adults are an important part of our country and need to be addressed in a number of ways. But in addition to all of the issues that my colleagues have talked about, this administration has had an unprecedented commitment to increasing the supply of affordable senior housing. And this is something that we haven't done in this country for over 10 years. So I give them a huge grade for that.
Thank you very much. And Ramsey, please.
Well, I am so pleased to be here and great to see everyone. Such a great nationwide reach you have with this webinar, and echo the sentiments of my colleagues. You know, the administration has done a good job. I'd say they could do even better. I want to push even further. We have just such an opportunity talking about substantive policy right now in ways that we hadn't been previously in the last administration, that we do want to see more and we want to see better. If they get full credit, American Rescue Plan, Inflation Reduction Act, some of the provisions around Medicare, prescription drug provisions, long overdue and huge, no doubt about it. And they'll result in real money back in the wallet of millions of older adults. So we must shout that from the mountaintop. And the ACA premium subsidy extensions, huge. Love the fiscal year 23 budget with some strong recommendations on Medicare and mental health parity and the workforce, which we see due to the pandemic is so essential to address. And then at NCOA, where we're working with older adults every day that are struggling to make ends meet, struggling for to meet their basic needs around food and nutrition. We were thrilled by the administration's update to the Thrifty Food Plan, providing much needed boost in SNAP benefits as states began to look at the issues. So fabulous historic wins, but I have to say it was disappointing. We couldn't get Medicaid home and community-based services over the finish line. We had such momentum. Family medical leave, another disappointment. Medicare expansion to cover dental, hearing, vision. Wish we could have gotten more there. Can't blame the White House entirely, but I think there was more political capital that could have been spent. Would have liked to have seen it spent.
So what was your grade? I'm sorry, I missed that on the way in.
I'm a half full, glass half full kind of gal. I give them a B+.
Okay. You know, I think everybody on this webinar would love to have all of you as their professor, you know, because you're very generous in your grades. So you brought up HCBS, which is a very important topic, home and community-based services, Barbara, under Medicaid. So the question is, can funding for home and community-based services under Medicaid ever get passed separately? And does this issue have a messaging problem? Katie, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I would never say never. So, I'd love to believe it has. Is it a messaging problem? I think it's a problem that we don't understand Medicaid well enough. I don't think we understand who it serves and particularly why this is needed. I think when we think about expanding HCBS Medicaid, we need to talk about it as an investment, not as an expense. It's an investment in the people who need these services. And I would also say that one of our message points needs to be about the waiting lists, that there are thousands and thousands of people sitting on waiting lists who need access to these services who can't get them now. So there's a lot to sort of unpack there, but I think, again, we need this funding, and the folks who are sitting on those waiting lists right now absolutely need these services.
Right. Sandy, I know you touched on this in your opening comment, so want to expand a little bit?
Sure, happy to. Well, I would say doing a separate bill on Medicaid home and community-based services is tough. It's tough to do a separate bill on anything these days. You need to package it with something else, but it could happen. I'm with you, Katie. I'd never say never. I'm always the half full glass, but I think the issue becomes we have to have a stronger coalition to be able to raise these issues. And on the messaging side, people fall into Medicaid HCBS in a personal crisis situation. And so they're not thinking of it as a policy issue, a national issue. Katie, to your point, who all it serves. And we need to change that. We really need a public information campaign about what Medicaid HCBS is and who is benefiting from it.
All right. Karyne, I see you agreeing on that point.
Totally agree. I was about to say it has a PR problem in that there's a perception not only with younger Americans, but also with those who maybe don't depend on Medicaid, that it's for people unlike them, and so they don't care. And so we've got to change the perception of that, but it's because people don't understand it and what it does in terms of investing in people's ability to have access to this so that we have a more productive society, not a sick society. So it has a big PR thing, and we do need more people. And I'd like to see more advocates on the Hill. I'd like to see more members of Congress really being in the forefront of not only this issue, but all aging issues.
Ramsey?
Sure. Well, I think the pandemic really awakened a lot of people in regard to the fact without care work, there's no work. We need caregivers, whether it be for children, older, frailer relatives, individuals with disabilities. So I do think we have a moment to lift up those personal stories. We've got to paint the picture. We've got to help people self-identify and recognize the role home and community-based services can play in their life, because we can parlay it to a middle-class issue, a workers issue. And we really need to hone in on that messaging, lift up those stories, and take the momentum we have from the expansion conversations. Better care, better jobs was good messaging. I think we can continue to carry that forward. It's about both strengthening the jobs and creating the access so that we can get rid of those waiting lists. And depending on the midterm elections, I mean, it could be difficult to get a major investment if Republicans take the House or the Senate, but incremental change, that's possible. And looking at reducing or eliminating the wait lists and addressing the workforce crisis that all incomes are experiencing. So I think we need a big push, and we need to build on the strength of the existing momentum.
So Peter, before I turn to you, Mike, I'll add one piece to this. Would we do better if they focused more on the equity side of Medicaid in the messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you do focus on who's impacted most. I have to tell you, Bob, I'm participating in this webinar from the Rosalind Carter Institute. She is having a caregiving conference as we speak. And this notion of seizing the moment and thinking creatively about how to talk about these issues in ways that touch people's lives has come up repeatedly at the conference. So I think as advocates, we need to do the same and lean on folks who maybe are a little shy of even admitting they need these services, but talk about it in a very real, in a very impactful way, and bringing more people in, building the coalition to get them to the Hill, and have folks who are recognizable in their communities talking about these issues could really improve the messaging issue.
Okay, before I go to my next question, Barbara or Eddie, any questions from the crowd, which has now grown to 242 people? I'm very impressed.
Nothing so far.
Nothing so far. Okay, Barbara?
I just prompted them. I just
Okay.
sent an email out to everybody saying, don't be shy, don't be
That's
shy.
right. That's right. You know, that we're auditioning for new panelists too. So, you know, keep that in mind with your questions. So tomorrow, I believe, the cost of living adjustment for Social Security for 2023 will be announced. It's expected to be perhaps as high as 8.7%, which is good news. But should we be worried about Social Security, Ramsey?
Probably not in the short term, but yes, in the long term. I mean, we have more options on the table if we address solvency sooner rather than later, but we have a tendency to kick the can a bit. So we push for some conversations to begin to heat up sooner rather than later to address that solvency, and more importantly, strengthen Social Security to better address the income adequacy as we age. So much of what guides Social Security was built on 1950s understandings of workforce patterns and household composition, doesn't really reflect the realities of caregiving and the true cost of living, for that matter. The COLA is going to be great, historic increase, but it's a Band-Aid because so many have become reliant on Social Security alone as their primary source of income in old age, and it doesn't begin to cover the true costs.
All right. Peter?
Yeah, I'm worried about something related to this issue, Bob. I'm worried about who cares about this issue. When you think about 2020 and you think about how almost 80% of older adults voted, whereas only 50% of young adults voted. And when you look at the recent report from the Social Security Medicare Board of Trustees that basically talked about how we're facing a Social Security cut by 20% in about 13 to 14 years, I worry that the people who are going to be impacted by those cuts the most are not paying attention to it now, and that it'll be too late by the time they come of age and will be scratching their heads. So we need more voter engagement, more voter education. This needs to be part of the conversation with younger advocates.
Right. Katie?
Well, I agree completely. In the short term, I think, you know, we don't have a problem. In the long term, demographics are certainly not in our favor. And, you know, to your point, Peter, I think, you know, as a country, we're not very good at looking way out in the horizon and planning for the future. And I think that's going to be the biggest problem that we have with Social Security and frankly, Medicare, is that we're not taking the long-term view, we're taking a very short-term view. But if you look at the demographics, you know, they don't tell lies. And I think looking out in the horizon, we are in trouble.
When I give speeches, sometimes I do a word association game and I say, what's the first word that comes to your mind after I say Congress? It wouldn't be some of the bad words I hear, but the one that doesn't ever said is foresight. You never hear that. You never hear that connection. Karyne?
Oh, well, you know, I'll agree particularly with Peter. You know, I remember when they started, I guess the 80s, when they started talking about privatization. And it was because we had sort of not paid attention to Social Security. And unfortunately, that cloud still sort of lingers out there, particularly with young people, because even my kids who are in their 30s are saying, well, it's not going to be there when I get older. So, you know, and so it really left a cloud in terms of people's understanding of where we are. And then we're continuing to hear from other people that we're in such big trouble. So I think it's important for us and incumbent upon those of us who recognize that this is a long-term game that we should bring it up to the forefront along with all the other issues that we're having to deal with that have immediate issues. But I think this one certainly warrants being up in our top 5.
Right. And Sandy?
You know, I agree with all my colleagues. I think the issue is it's fixable. I mean, you know, when we're looking short term, we don't have an issue. Long term, it's fixable, but we need to take action to do that. But, you know, Karyne, to your point, I think that, and Peter as well, is we need to really re-message Social Security as a economic benefit for all. It's, yes, you know, you can take funding, you can get your benefits out as you get older, but it's a safety net for everybody. And if we message it that way, I think then we will be able to attract more support from younger generations.
Yeah, and just to your point, you know, Sandy, it really, people don't think of it as an insurance program.
Right.
They think of it as a retirement program. And so we do have to change the messaging on this.
Well, your response has triggered a question that I see. I know as moderator, I'm not supposed to sneak and look at the questions, but I just did. So somebody just said, okay, you talked about Social Security. What are the long-term viable funding options, financing options for Social Security? What would you put on the table as any? So just whoever wants to answer that one, just chime in.
Sure. Well, I think one easy fix that would go a long way is to go back to addressing the payroll cap. When the payroll cap was put in place, the intent was to cover 90% of aggregate wages. So to tax 90% of aggregate wages, use it to fund Social Security. That has eroded over several years, and it's somewhere around 80 to 85% of aggregate wages that we're actually taxing at this point. So some say scrap the cap entirely, and that would allow all wages to be taxed, and that could go a long way. Others say restore it to its intended level of capturing 90% of aggregate wages. That also would go a long way.
Right. Anyone else with thoughts on that?
We do have a bunch of questions if you want. They're all lining up.
I see that, and I'm looking at some of them, and I think some of them will be addressed in the later portion of this panel.
Okay, so we'll hang on.
And I assure you we'll do our best to respond to them all. So, and all of you are concerned about this issue, I know. How dire are workforce shortages in the field of aging? And what needs to be done in Washington about it? Katie, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Well, they're very dire. We have, you know, just an insufficient number of people working in aging services and providing the services to people as they age. And what the result is that we are going to have a severe, if we're not already having a severe problem with access to services and supports. So what can be done? Certainly immigration is a big part of the solution, legal immigration, finding paths to citizenship and to working in this country. Right now, about a third of our workforce in aging services is foreign born. And in the last number of years, we've cut off that supply, and that's contributing to our workforce shortage. And for many of these folks, they come from countries that revere their elders. And when they come to the United States, they would love to be working with older adults. So we need to figure out a legal path to immigration. We also need to increase, I think Ramsey spoke to it earlier, we need to increase Medicaid funding. A lot of the money that providers get to serve older adults comes directly from Medicaid. And if we can't pay our workers well, we won't have workers. Without workers, we don't have any care. And then I think we need incentives to work in our field. We have incentives for doctors to work in rural communities, for example. Why can't we have incentives for people to work in aging services, work with older adults? So I think there's not one answer to this question. I think there are lots of avenues that we need to pursue because the shortage is so severe right now.
Right. Sandy.
We had done a survey of the area agencies on aging and found in the spring and found that 60% of them were experiencing major vacancies in their positions. And in addition to that, a third of the area agencies on aging had 50% of their volunteer workforce lost during the COVID crisis. So you combine those two things and you can see the huge impact. And the impact, Katie, as you said, is ultimately in being able to serve people and to not have to limit the services because you don't have the workforce to do it. In saying that, we need investment in the workforce, and we need investment, as was included in Build Back Better, for Medicaid. But I would say the other concern that we had is you increase salary levels for Medicaid workers, then what does that do for programs like the Older Americans Act? So we really need a complete investment across the board in aging services workforce.
Peter?
Yeah, you know, this issue just came up in a roundtable that we had with some of our members who represent foundations, and they said, when asked, the number one issue facing their grantees is a workforce shortage. And they have grants that aren't being fulfilled. Impact is not being made because folks just don't have the staff. I think for me, one of the top things DC can do is just raise the federal minimum wage. Let's think hard about what we're paying folks who are taking care of us, and let's raise the minimum wage.
Ramsey?
But I think we all need to stop denying the demographics. The demand is only going to increase. The numbers are real, and the workforce shortages are very serious, especially when it comes to home and community-based care, nursing home care. These workers are undervalued, underpaid, not receiving full benefits, and it really is an illustration of us as a society not honoring care work, not honoring this work. And that is a shift, a paradigm shift we all need to make. This is important, critical work. It's care work is essential to all other work, and it's also honoring those that played by the rules, contributed to our society, allowed for our economy to be what it is. We need to make the investments so they have the care they need as they age. So, I mean, I share Sandy's sentiment as well, that it's not only about infusing resources in Medicaid and expansion of home and community-based services to be better jobs and meet the demand, but it's also the Older Americans Act and all the community services that support individuals to stay in their community, in their home. The workforce shortages and the volunteer shortages, for that matter, are really crippling our ability to deliver on the service needed. So we need sufficient funding of all of these programs so we can have the robust workforce we know we need given the demographic trends.
Okay, Karyne?
Well, I'm not going to repeat because everything that my colleagues have mentioned are certainly priorities. I will just say that I had hoped after what we went through with the beginnings of COVID, and everyone saw how important our workers were in these particular settings, that would raise some of the level of interest in knowing that we needed to invest more into it. We've just got to continue then again to make people understand these are people who are caring for your loved ones. These are people who are going to one day care for you. You want them to be experienced, trained, you want to be empathetic, you want them to be people who care. And so we've got to treat them accordingly. And they also have families and have to have a living wage and all of those things. So hopefully, again, one of the things we have to continue to do is just raise awareness to the importance of us investing in the very people who will care for our loved ones and ourselves.
Thank you very much. So Barbara and yes, Katie?
I was just going to say, I think that we also need to talk about the impact of this workforce shortage on real people's lives. People are boarding in hospitals because they can't be discharged because there's not enough home health nurses, for example. People are being turned away from the kinds of services that they need because there simply aren't enough people to provide the care. So we need to begin to look at not just the fact that there are not enough bodies, there's an impact on real people's lives.
Thank you. Barbara, I know you've got activity in the chat, in the Q&A session, so you want to pick one or two to throw out?
Yeah, I'll pick one of the last ones that came in since we're on this topic. Does the Social Security need to raise the age of 65? How do you feel about that? You know, it is a question that's come up quite a bit, you know.
Well, let me step in and try to be a clarifier here. It has been raised, actually. It was raised to 67 for younger people in the 1983 Social Security Reform Bill, which came about because of the crisis that was affecting Social Security back then. So if it's a question about going further above 67, I welcome any colleagues' thoughts on that. Just if you don't want to talk about it, go on mute. If you do, let me know. Karyne?
I will only say I certainly understand that that may be a way to try to address that. But for communities of color, that's a concern because obviously, you know, that our demographics, our life expectancy, all of those other things are totally different. And our ability then to work long-term is a little different. And we've not then addressed all of the issues that create the inequity of older, let's say, African Americans, people of color and others. And so that would be the concern I know that would be raised in our communities is by raising it, that means that people who aren't able then to work longer just because of health issues, that would raise some concern.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, I'd agree wholeheartedly. I mean, different demographic groups, life expectancies also vary. Also, there'd be implications for individuals in different occupations that are manual labor, that are tough on your body. So I'd revisit the naming of the key Social Security claiming milestones. I would say instead we need to signal and nudge people to delay claiming Social Security as long as comfortable for them, given their family and work and demographic considerations. So thinking differently about how we name early eligibility, normal retirement, and delayed retirement, revisiting that to signal instead that if you can and want to work longer, you should, but not necessarily changing those dates that for so many in labor intensive occupations or in demographic groups that have shorter life expectancy would be quite tragic.
Sandy?
Yeah, I agree. I also think that there needs to be planning and counseling that's available for all people to determine when they need to financially take Social Security. But I agree. I think it's not only the cultural and racial aspects of it, it's also the types of occupations. And we're seeing that at the local level every day. You can't, you could be a healthy 60-year-old, or you could be a very disabled 60-year-old with lots of chronic conditions. The same thing happens all throughout the lifespan. So I would hate to box us in.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, another question for us?
Well, along those lines, someone mentioned, that Social Security was never intended to be a retirement plan for seniors. And, even lower income families are saving something for their futures. What can be done to educate folks to, do their own retirement plans and through savings and economies? I know it's an educational component, but you might, instead of thinking of Social Security as your one and done, should be your supplement. So do you want to talk on that?
All right. I'm gonna toss that one to Peter.
Yeah, related, I think it has a lot to do with how our society views working period and the federal infrastructure that exists to support finding a new job. So much of the great work that I know some of my colleagues do supports helping seniors find and get retrained in new positions. But I wonder whether we can't also use those same networks to channel and inform folks on retirement planning, even if it is saving $1 a week, so to speak, because that's barely what you could afford. I think it's really important that we use existing infrastructure that gets at supporting our workforce to then talk about and educate and inform on related retirement planning issues.
Anyone else on that one?
Well, only that, Peter, we do the CSEP program, which is the Senior Community Services Employment Program. It is a Department of Labor program designed to help low-income older adults get trained and be employed. And many of you probably on this thing already know that. We do. We include all of those things. We feel like they're our captive audience when they come as participants in our program. And we do financial literacy, we do health issues, we do a myriad of programs to try to educate, to make sure that they become then advocates for themselves rather than looking to us to be their voice. So it's very, very important to. I can tell you, though, that it's very easy for those of us who have the ability and have had the training or understanding of how we have to balance our checkbooks and how we have to save and put into our 401ks to someone who may not even have enough quarters in their Social Security to even get anything. Or the reason that they're coming to us for employment opportunities because they still need to work because they have no other income. There are many people who've worked all their lives and never invested in a pension or a 401k, and it's not because it wasn't accessible to them. So there are all kinds of reasons. So everybody's just not in a position to be able to say, we can teach them, you ought to save, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. This is what's available to you. But if their basic needs, being able to pay rent, being able to buy food, being able to afford any medicines, if those things will come first before having to do that. And so, we try to help those people as much as we possibly can. But everybody's just not on the same level. And that's when we talk about equity, we're talking about equality in terms of people having an opportunity so that then when they get to be older, they can do so in dignity and that they can then be able to have a life or look back on a life that they've maybe enjoyed or not had hardships, but then be able to at least age in dignity.
Thank you. I see Eddie Rivas put himself on the screen, so that must mean he has a question.
No, I just put in the chat that one of the things that we're all skirting around is financial literacy at all ages. It should be starting in grade school. Think about how many, and I've said this to other people privately, I've been astounded by how many colleagues in the field of aging did not plan for their retirements, did not have enough retirement savings, that they kept working way past when some of us were lucky enough to step off. So it's an issue. Financial literacy is a problem. Mm-hmm. If I can jump to a question from a fellow board member from VTV, Pazita Vive asks that locally in Montgomery County, but in the state of Maryland, actually, nursing home inspections have really gone downhill. Montgomery County had the advantage of having our own inspectors within county who were county employees. But the state took away that ability and took back those inspectors and have said that they're going to be sent all over the state. But we know for a fact that nursing homes aren't being inspected right now. Any thoughts, Katie, I guess to you first, sure, on how we should address it? We've tried to raise the flag. Our state legislators have already gone to the state health department, to their Office of Quality and Healthcare. Right. And we're raised the flag to CMS as well. We know that Senator Casey.
All right, Eddie, we got the question.
All right. Sorry.
So I would just, it's a good question. It's an important issue, obviously. I was talking to one state recently, a large state that has employs 200 nursing home surveyors, and they have 90 vacancies right now. So the workforce shortage that we talked about earlier with respect to direct care services, that applies in this case as well. And these are all state employees. So I think it is a workforce issue, but it's also an issue of priority and value and how much the state values their ability to inspect nursing homes. And they're obviously making some kind of a judgment in Maryland about that, but it is a state issue and needs to be advocated at the state level.
Anybody else on that question? Okay, our last policy question before we move into more political type things is, how concerned are you? We're going to introduce a term that all of us on this panel know the term, but not everybody in the audience may know the term, which is called the service cliff. Okay. Service cliff, we're talking about when all this extra pandemic money was provided to a range of programs. Okay, and then if it suddenly goes away, the question is, how concerned are you and your members about hitting that service cliff when emergency pandemic money is reduced or goes away? Sandy, we'll start with you.
Sure, we are amazingly concerned. At the Area Agency on Aging level, again, a survey we did, 94% of the area agencies on aging were serving more clients than they ever have before, and 95% noted that the clients that they were serving had more complex needs. So you look at the need, we keep talking about demographics. It's the demographics are there, the need is increasing, and at the same time, we can't afford as an aging network to go back to pre-COVID funding levels. And the only way that that's not going to happen is if we all advocate together and get older adults and caregivers to advocate, because we know these services are critical. They're critical to being able to ensure that people can live and age well at home. But if we go back to pre-pandemic levels of funding, the waiting lists will soar and many, many older adults will be left without the supports they need.
Ramsey?
Oh, wholeheartedly agree. I mean, the Aging Network showed up, pivoted, and ensured continuous service during the pandemic. But what the pandemic really did was put a spotlight on the real demand. The amount of the need for services and supports has always been so much more than the resources have made available. I mean, Older Americans Act was created at the same time as Medicare and Medicaid, yet we're a pittance in comparison in terms of the funding level. The historic investments from the American Rescue Plan, critical, but that funding needs to be sustained. Now that we've really been able to illustrate the true demand out there, and also expectations around hybrid services continue. We were able to piece it together in the pandemic, but the cost of both remote and in-person services, that's the new expectation. So we're absolutely concerned about the cliff of the resources, and think it's incumbent upon all of us to raise up the stories, raise up the numbers, and really demand the true sustained investments that we've long known were needed for to meet the demand.
Great. Peter?
Yeah, as you know, many of our members are equally concerned, and I echo what Ramsey and Sandy said. I would also add that as advocates and as leaders, we need to also be ready for this and come up with our plan Bs and Cs. I can tell you we've already heard folks at the state level thinking creatively about how you augment and support these services. So for example, in those states that have a marijuana related tax, folks are thinking creatively about how to use those resources to back up some, admittedly it'd be a small amount given what we're talking about here, but I think it would be incumbent on all of us to start planning for what happens if we don't see that pandemic money again.
Right. Katie?
Well, the organizations that I represent at LeadingAge are community-based, not-for-profit, many faith-based organizations that provide services and supports to people as they age. And I would say we've already hit the cliff. We're over the cliff. We're seeing a lot of these programs close altogether. We're seeing a lot of them cut back on the services that they can provide. And I think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. Some of it is workforce, but a whole lot of it is the kind of federal funds that shored us up during COVID.
All right. Karyne, any thoughts on this?
Just briefly, I remember Peter mentioning that, 80%, I think it was you, Peter, that said 80% of the voters last time were older adults. It's amazing that they don't have the whereby to understand that they should be voting ways to preserve their own existence. I always call it the Sixth Sense way. You remember the movie Sixth Sense when they say, I see dead people, and people don't realize it's them, and so they don't vote in the way that will sustain and to even look forward into what I might need later. So, I think we're at the cliff too. I've always felt we were underfunded. We can't help all the people that come to us, and it's heartbreaking. But you know, we do what we can and we try to support our communities, but it has got to increase, making everyone understand that the demographics in terms of this country getting, oh, well, the world, but speaking specifically about this country, are all getting older. So we've got then to address a society that will be older.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to tell the folks who are sending questions in, the ones that are sending the village related questions in, we're going to come to that near the end, just so you know that. And we'll do everything we can to get as many of the questions asked as possible. Now we're going to move to when we become pundits, but not partisans, we become pundits in this question. And these should be very short answers. And I'm going to start with the first one. Moving to the midterm elections, what are your predictions on the House and Senate majority after the election is over? Peter?
It's going to be split. I think the Republicans will take over the House and the Democrats will take the Senate. And I think why that's a problem is not because of partisanship. It's because 75% of aging bills get introduced by Democrats. And so if we have a Democratic Congress, we'll see, hopefully, we would see more aging related bills.
Katie?
I agree with Peter. I think it'll be a split.
Okay. Sandy?
I agree.
You agree? Okay. Ramsey?
You know, that is what most pollsters and pundits are predicting, but I have to say with every day, it looks like the House could be a toss-up. You've got Republicans out there talking about revisiting Social Security and Medicare every 5 years, maybe annually for that matter. I feel like that's going to gin up some energy and draw some stark contrast. So I'm thinking House could, by small margins, could be a toss-up.
Okay. I'm glad we have one level of disagreement in this panel. First time we have that. Karyne, go ahead. You get the last word on this one.
Well, I disagree with Ramsey. I also think it's going to be a split, but thank God that we'll still have Biden up there to stop any of that bad legislation that just might get through. So, yeah, split, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Now, this one a little trickier. I'm not sure everybody wants to jump on this one, but I put it out there anyway. So knowing that the 2024 presidential election campaign begins right after the midterms, in fact, if it hasn't started already. So who do you think is the current face of the Republican Party, number one? And who do you think is the strongest for the Republicans to put forward in 2024? So I think I'll go to Ramsey on that one first.
Well, in Congress, I'd say Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and then House Leader McCarthy. And then in the White House race, Trump's in it. He's in it. And Governor DeSantis is in it for sure. Strongest, I'd say Trump.
Karyne?
I just have to shake my head. I agree with her completely on what she just said.
All right. Peter?
Yes, but I would keep an eye out on Senator Tim Scott and a couple of governors that have been doing some interesting work behind the scenes, I think, like Governor Youngkin from Virginia and Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas.
Okay. Katie?
Yeah, I would agree with all of my colleagues. I don't think there is one face of the Republican Party, though. I think they're emerging more than one face. And I think that's what's going to make this next election quite interesting.
Okay. Sandy, any thoughts?
I'll be interested to see if there are different factions of the Republican Party that ultimately end up emerging. But I do agree with my colleagues on who are the faces that are out front right now.
Okay. Now switching to the Democratic question at hand, and I'm going to go to Karyne first, and she brought his name up already. Does President Biden do a second term, and when does he announce either way?
Yes, he does, and he'll announce. He'll let the talk, go from after the midterm and everything. But I think he will run again.
Peter?
This is a tough one for me, Bob. I'm gonna be a little provocative and say no. And I think it's because with a divided Congress, he would effectively become a lame duck president. So why?
Okay. Katie?
He has said he will, and I think he's a man of his word.
Okay. Ramsey?
I think it's still too early to tell. I think it'll depend on a variety of factors. He'll wait it out around January 2024. I think he'll let it be known either way.
And Sandy.
I think he'll run.
Okay. Well, there is an 80th birthday party coming up, so maybe that's the occasion when he'll announce it. We'll see. Barbara.
We can't be ageist, Bob. We're not, we're against ageism. So.
No, I was just stating a demographic fact. You're into demographics. I just tried to put one out there for you. Barbara, what do we got?
I'm trying to think if there's anything along this line. I mean, you guys have talked about, you know, if the Republicans come in, so you answered that. I don't have any in here right now, as long in that line of thinking. So I will get to the other questions.
Okay, now this is actually a repeat question that I was proud to do at the panel of pundits at ASA, where Peter and Ramsey and Karyne have been involved. Question is, we talk often about aging policy in terms of healthcare, long-term care, economic security, but clearly today, older adults today and tomorrow impacted by legislation related to infrastructure, climate, voting rights in general. So what policy priorities should we be more intentional about including in aging policy discussions? Peter, you lead on that one.
Yeah, look, it's really, I'll be a little selfish and biased here. It's really the ASA's priorities here are talking about digital inclusion efforts. I know the Village to Village movement is increasingly relying heavily on technology. Also ageism, and can we look at our laws as they're applied and as they're written and how they're impacting our view of aging. Health equity, so many folks are really keen on looking at workforce issues, we touched on those, but also data, so that we all understand and then act on breaking down the disparities that exist. And finally, where I start, which is climate. We have to look at how climate impacts us. I live in the state of Florida. The West Coast was just ravaged. 80% of the deaths were older adults from Hurricane Ian. We're in a crisis right now. We have to talk about these issues as well.
Sandy.
Well, I think that we need to take a broad scope on this. And I think when you're talking about infrastructure, we want people to live at home in their community. Well, infrastructure is critical to making sure that there is housing and there's transportation that is safe and is adaptable to people across the lifespan. So I think we need to broaden our scope, and certainly climate is included in that as well. Immigration, we've already talked about. But I also want to reinforce the fact that it's all not just national issues that we need to focus in on. I think at the local level, and most, the village movement is really a local level issue, is what I've seen is a lot of county commissions and city councils actually looking across the board and adopting policies to say every single step, every single piece of legislation we look at, we're going to look at it from a lifespan perspective. So looking at taxes, looking at transportation, looking at technology and how it impacts people across their lifespan. And that can be adopted at the local level. And we have examples of that already in place.
Thank you. Ramsey?
Well, here to all of what Sandy shared. At the National Council on Aging, we believe aging well means living well. And so we do need to zoom out and look at all the components of living well so that we can age well. And we really do need to infuse the older adults' perspective and needs in so many of these critical conversations. I mean, digital equity, top of mind. We saw it in the pandemic. Connectivity, hardware, software, digital literacy, basic needs. I mean, Wi-Fi connection, it's as essential as food, water, electricity, and it should be a public good to that extent. And we need to make sure that that connection to socialize, friends and family, as well as work, is available to all ages, including older adults. We also think transportation, safe streets. Older adults need access to reliable, regular, affordable transportation. It connects all the dots around their health and their wealth, and access to community services. affordable and safe housing and making sure that housing can age with us. We can afford it, it's accessible, it can age with us ultimately. And then I so appreciate ASA's leadership on climate change. It's such an important issue when you look at floods and droughts, freezes, hurricanes, earthquakes. The most vulnerable are affected. We administer a workforce development program in Puerto Rico, and they were hit so hard. And we have programs in Florida as well. Those that were already one crisis away can become climate refugees as a result of the impact of global warming. And so we really need to make sure older adults' interests and needs are infused in those conversations. And we bring to bear the agency and advocacy of older adults when it comes to those issues and shoring up legacy for next generation.
Karyne.
Well, obviously, I agree with all of that because for communities of color, the impact is sometimes even greater. And so, of course, we have, in talking to, we had a focus group couple of months ago. We were really sort of at the end of what COVID really meant in our communities. And yes, it did highlight all of the inequities of communities in terms of healthcare and access, job loss, everything, how it impacted communities of color. But the one thing in looking at the future that we found that was most pressing is we're really very concerned about how this country is moving back to its racial divide. And how that, everybody, the feeling that people of color are taking over rather than looking at as an American issue, which we all come together with our diversity and we move forward and address these problems together. But the racial impact that we've seen and some of the things that are in leadership positions, the people just out in California on that city council, those kinds of statements and things, it's not anymore any kind of silent cry or what have you. It's a very loud bullhorn to it's us and them. And that is a real concern in communities of color moving forward. So all of the things you talked about, climate impacts us, workforce impacts us, housing impacts, all those things, but it'll be even more detrimental if it appears to be that it's on a racial issue or an ethnic issue or any of those things. That will make us continue to divide in this country, and we won't get anywhere.
Okay. Katie.
Well, I certainly agree with all of my colleagues. I think it's not so much picking the issues, it's really taking an approach that has aging top of mind, but also families top of mind. I mean, older adults are part of families, so we need to have that family lens, but we also need to have an equity lens on all the issues that we're dealing with as a country. It's interesting to me at LeadingAge, so much of our work is really focused on health and housing over the years. And increasingly, we are talking to the Department of Education, Environmental Protection Agency, Homeland Security, State Department, because all of these agencies impact the work we're trying to do, impact the lives of older adults. And so I think I think we need to widen our lens, widen our aperture as we're advocating for the missions that we all uphold.
Thank you. So to the audience at hand, we have covered a lot of issues, as you are well aware, and you're maintaining yourself here is very good. If we have missed something, this would be your opportunity to throw it into the Q&A. We'll try to get to it and see. So every one of you and myself and others are concerned about ageism, okay? And name 2 or 3 things that we need to do to combat ageism. Karyne, I'm going to call on you since you called me out a minute ago. I better go to you first now.
Well, it just as all isms, when we stereotype people, and when that just automatically then brings in some sort of discrimination. And so we've had all kinds of campaigns over the past, few years, reframe aging, aging, that, we've done all of that, and it still doesn't seem to have resonated in communities of understanding that there is a growing population of older people. They are still very participatory in society and contributing members. They're not just all about Medicare and all of Social Security and a drain on society. So I think the only way we really address ageism is we've really got to be able to tell the stories and to put, each one of us, and I'm not talking about us just on this panel, I'm talking about everyone who is concerned and aware of this issue, that we take it upon ourselves to make sure that we talk about the great things that happen as you age. When I first came onto this job, I used to talk about them and us. And now I remind myself, I'm a them now. And loving every moment of it. I'm getting ready in any moment now. I'm expecting my son to call. I'm expecting my 9th grandchild, something that I had never, well, I'd hope, but I never thought would happen. And so it puts you in a different light. And yes, I've had a blessed life. And so I don't face some of the difficulties or challenges that the people that I help every day are in. But that's my job, is to make sure that we change that perception. And we have people who come in who have contributed all of their lives. They've raised their families. They've contributed to their communities. And then something happens, bad health, accident, or just what happened, lose a job. And their whole lives change. And then they have to depend on the very services that we're trying to protect or enhance. Yeah. That's not given the kind of respect that I think we should. So there's a lot that we can do just to enhance and to raise the awareness of how wonderful it is to age, if you can age again in dignity, and how much we can still contribute to making sure that we're a society that cares for our older adults, whether they're ill, whether they want a job, whatever the case may be. We have to become that kind of society.
Okay, Katie.
Really to Karen's point, ageism may be the only ism that impacts every single person, because it's really about discrimination on the basis of age, and we all have an age. I think that there's been great research that's been done on ageism, and one of the key points that's made is that what we need to do is rather than separate people on the basis of age, we need to bring them together. So the notion of not separating older adults and younger people, bringing them together, intergenerational, multi-generational, all in one place. But I also think that ageism just isn't well understood. And I think we need to name it. We need to call it out when we see it, and bring it to people's attention, because I think it isn't well understood how ubiquitous it is in our society and actually all over the world.
Ramsey?
Oh, I fully agree. I mean, ageism is still a socially acceptable form of discrimination. What we need to wake up and realize is we're discriminating against our future selves. It's not just harmful to society, it's harmful to us as individuals. Becca Levy at Yale conducted research that demonstrates when we buy into those negative stereotypes on aging, we're shaving 7.5 years off our own lives. Never mind missing out on all the experience, the well of wisdom that we get in honoring and valuing the contribution as we all age. So, I mean, we really need to have some self-reflection. I echo the sentiment of others, call it out when we see it, check ourselves and think about it. It can go both ends of the spectrum. She's too young to lead the org. He's too old to learn the new technology. And we need to pump the brakes and recognize the ageism for what it is, call it out, unpackage it, and work to address it. I think we also really need to recognize it as the unlawful bias that it is and recognize it as such by elevating older adults' rights as the human rights that they are. We saw with the pandemic, the neglect and what it meant in terms of lives lost. So I know I share with some of my colleagues on the panel a commitment to a United Nations Convention on the rights of older persons and really recognizing those rights as human rights. I think it's so critical to do so.
Mhm. Sandy?
Well, one of the things that I love about US Aging is our vision statement, which is to value and support people as they age, not at any given age, but as they age. So I think as we look at ageism, you know, Katie, to your point, it's really across the board, is to ensure that we as a society really focus on the assets as well as the needs that people have. And the Hallmark Company will not be happy with me, but I think we need to dump all of those cards that people get as they get older, which are insulting and certainly not respectful and celebratory of old age.
And Peter?
Yeah, as my colleagues know, battling and combating ageism and creating a more age-inclusive society is very much a focus of the ASA's work. And I want to talk about it in two ways. One is a practical way. We partnered with Shutterstock, the online image library, to really help them understand how providing age-inclusive stock photo images could lift all of us up. And in the chat, I'll pop up a link so that everyone here on this call can have access to those resources. And on a macro level, on a policy level, look, I'm with so many of my colleagues here. We need to understand it more, but more importantly, we need our government to understand it more. I'd love to see a GAO analysis of how ageism impacts so many of the programs that we currently support. There's so much we can do. Again, I think it's both personal and there's some real policy issues that we need to consider.
Mm-hmm. Great. So the next question, I'm going to try to give the caveat on this. This is the DEI question that you have. The question is, how do you assess your commitment? I don't want necessarily details per se or commercials per se. I'm just interested in, at this juncture, in the whole focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, how do you assess your association's commitment to DEI at the moment? So Ramsey, you start.
Sure. Well, at the National Council on Aging for over 70 years, we've been working to improve the lives of older adults, especially those struggling. And over 95% of those we measurably impact. They are low-income individuals. But the last couple of years, the racial reckoning, the pandemic, the demographic realities have really pushed us to look behind that low-income labeling and better understand and disaggregate those that don't get the gift of the quality of years, maybe don't even get the quantity of years, and better understand those demographic groups, the intersectionality they experience with the ageism, plus the sexism, plus the racism, and take a close look at how we're prioritizing and targeting our programs, our policies, our products. And what we found is not a surprise to any of you on the call. You know, the health and economic security of older women, communities of color, specifically Latinx and African American, LGBTQ, rural and low income, that health and economic security is so precarious. Those groups are so much more likely to age into poverty.
Right, let me jump in, and I want to just have this focused on how do you assess your commitment?
Sure.
Strong, strong, medium, could be better, one of those kind of things.
So I'd say we're strong with the low income focus, and we're on a journey to be more intentional and center on the culturally responsive approaches for those populations. Just last year, we improved.
Okay, that's all right. Let me jump.
Sure,
we're going to be short, a little tight on time. Katie, how do you assess your commitment to LeadingAge commitment to DEI?
Extremely strong, and we look at D, E, and I separately. So with respect to E and equity, we've heavy focus on elder justice, on combating elder abuse, but also on improving access to services. With respect to diversity, we have a very strong partnership with historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions to try to encourage careers in aging services among their students and their alumni. And in terms of inclusion, a lot of education with our member communities around cultural competence and cultural awareness because of the diversity of their workforce.
Thank you. Karyne, your assessment of your commitment.
Well, we've been committed for forever, not only for our
Nothing new
organization,
for
but
you, right?
for the world. Yeah. I just hope that all organizations, not just my colleagues here, but all organizations who have taken on a DE&I approach, that it becomes more than just a statement, but really becomes an action.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I'm particularly proud of ASA's long history on this topic, but even more so doubling down on it and talking about it, not just in the context of learning, but actually doing the work. In other words, we have staff we have staff programming where we are challenging ourselves to really do the work and listen to our colleagues and understand the biases and really how we can better ourselves in understanding one another and just sticking to the work. It's one thing to say we have a set of DEI principles. It's quite another to actually walk the walk like we are with our ASA Rise program, which is a national fellowship for leaders of color in aging, and creating allyship opportunities between leaders of color and people who look like me. So it's really about doing the work.
Thank you. And Sandy, your commitment.
We at USAG, we have a very strong commitment. We have for years in saying that the commitment takes many forms. And Karyne, to your point, it's not just an episodic. We have principles that we live the principles and that we translate and support those principles into action throughout our the Area Agency on Aging network. That being said, it's looking at ensuring that the programs and services are culturally competent and also culturally sensitive to the needs of a diverse population. But also on the workforce side is to ensure that as we grow our workforce, which hopefully we'll be able to, we've heard that this is a major issue, that it reflects the people that we are serving. And so we see those as two important components.
Thank you very much. Barbara, before I move on, what do you have to share with us? Anything question-wise?
Not on DEI.
No, I mean, just in general, yeah, because I think we're going to go to one more question on my list and then go to the village questions that have come in from your audience.
Okay, just to touch on the National Caregiving Support Act was one of the questions that came out there, but also a lot of chatter about, using volunteers in the workforce and how we can engage some of our older folks to come back into the workforce. Maybe touching on those areas would be great. And then we have village questions. Of course, there's exploding. So
yeah, that's that. Yeah, I want to make sure they all get in. So
okay.
Who wants to comment? I mean, we just saw the Raise Family Caregivers Act report come out, a very significant development. And again, like anything else, it's a matter of how do you go from here. So any initial thoughts, comments on that, Ramsey?
Well, just amazing accomplishment to get all the different stakeholders engaged, and 350 federal actions, 150 measures. Impressive. We all need to get to work together, and we prioritize the better care, better jobs components, taking that back up after the midterms, caregiver credits, family medical leave, and expansion of Medicare.
Okay, Katie?
I would just say long overdue and much needed. Absolutely.
Okay. Karyne?
Same here, long overdue.
Sandy?
This is a launch point. This is a moment when all of us need to get behind this and make caregiver issues a national priority.
Thank you. Peter?
Yep, I'm just going to repeat what Rosalind Carter has said to us, which is seize the moment. This is a real moment right now.
Okay. Now, this is going to be sort of a personal question, but again, focus on brevity, of course, which is the nature of the panel of pundits. So now, all of you are leaders in your associations, some longer, as we heard earlier, 20 years here and there. I'm not even going to tell you about how many years I've been doing my stuff. That's another story. And some with less tenure. So what is the most, okay, not the 10 things in your lifetime, but what is the most worthwhile thing you have done, you have accomplished in your current role in your association? So Karyne, on your 20th anniversary, what is it?
Well, just being able to keep a job that long, which has been really, really great. Oh my gosh. Well, we've been able to expand our network When I first came on, my predecessor had obviously done a wonderful job in terms of establishing the organization, but it was really important for us to expand our network to other states and other communities. And so with the help of a wonderful staff and directors, we've been able to reach more people and help more people beyond even what our resources have allowed us to do. So I know there are probably many people on this webinar who've never heard of the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging. And all I say to them is if you haven't heard of us because you've never needed us. And we are there, we are here to help, we do all we can. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we have expanded our network and our reach to help more people in communities of color.
Right. So we're going to go from long tenure to short tenure. Ramsey.
So North Star for us is social impact. I'm 2 years back at NCOA, and we're on a journey to improve the lives of 40 million older adults by 2030. Last year, we improved 6 million lives measurably, and I'm so proud of our expanded reach, the depth and breadth of our impact, which brings us up to 24 million lives to date. We're going to knock that 40 million out of the park.
All right, longer tenure. Sandy.
Well, in saying that, when I started out 20 years ago, we had a more focus on just one issue, and the Older Americans Act, and we've expanded that because the need is there. And the Older Americans Act has expanded at the same time. Now we have the majority of area agencies providing Medicaid, HCBS, and also being Medicare providers. So I think as I look at this, what I am most proud of is the fact that now we have resource centers focused in on housing and services and transportation, and partnering with healthcare and contracting with healthcare, and looking at population health from the perspective of chronic illness and dementia and caregiving. So it's looking and really looking at expanding the breadth of the capacity of area agencies on aging to serve all older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers.
Thank you. Shorter tenure. Peter, what's your greatest accomplishment so far?
So my proudest moment, I mentioned ASA Rise and the successful launch of it, but I have to tell you, it was at the annual conference that we just did in New Orleans, where I had a woman come up to me, grab me by the arm in front of 3,000 people as I was coming off the stage, and she said, "Thank you. This is the first time I feel at home. I feel like ASA now looks like America." And to me, that just spoke volumes about the work that we're doing to really be an inclusive membership organization and to take advantage of all perspectives and all experiences to try and advance aging in this country.
Thank you. Now, Katie, the reason I came to you last, I don't know how many years you've been doing LeadingAge. I know it's a while, but I'm not sure if it's 20 or 10 or 15. So you get the last word on this one.
All right. Well, you know, the community of not-for-profit providers, we touch millions and millions of lives every single day. And I think what I'm proud of is that we've stopped being so humble about that, that we've amplified our voice as an advocate for older adults that need an affordable place to live, and those who need services and supports in their communities.
Right. Thank you so much. Those answers, I really do appreciate that perspective, all of you, on that question, because that could have gone on for days, and you did a great job. So I appreciate that very much. Barbara, move us to the village questions, please.
Oh, happily. All right, so you all know the village movement. They're all 232 of them are in the wings here. So what do you think? The number one question is, what's the possible role for villages to help expand access to home and community-based services? I mean, during COVID, I will be honest, we not only survived, we thrived. You know, the villages pulled their bootstraps up. They were grassroots. They went into the communities. They're embedded into the communities. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on how we can expand, we can scale, we can do more and include more.
Okay. Katie, why don't you start on that one?
Well, I think it's really, we need a movement here. We need a big movement. We need a loud movement. We need to get loud and proud and work together. And I think, the Village Network is an amazing opportunity to galvanize your voices, your resources, along with the resources of everybody on this panel, every organization on this panel. That's the way we can make a difference. None of us can do it alone.
Karyne?
Well, I agree. And I would also like to see, obviously, more of your members and organization in communities of color. I know that when crises occur, they make, you move out and what have you, but I'd like to see, I mean, when I went on the website, I didn't see many faces of color. And so that's a welcoming an initiative that could occur where you get more people involved in your movement. So I congratulate you, I know, on all the work that you have done, but I would like to see a little bit more of participation from people of color in villages and work closer with you all. I had not worked with you all previously, so this is certainly an opportunity that I have learned a lot, and I look forward to a future of working together in a partnership.
Wonderful. Ramsey?
We've got to lift up those stories. Everyone has a story, their own story, a story of a loved one. We've got to be united in sharing those stories, making our electeds accountable to our issues in the midterms and beyond. And I think that your vast network can do just that. Lift up those stories, make those, engage those electeds, make them accountable.
Right. Peter?
Yeah, I would, because you're so embedded in the local community, you understand the local politics, the local civics. I would encourage all of you to feel comfortable to become part of local steering committees on aging-related issues, even on non-obvious aging-related issues, but bring an aging voice to those local committees that exist at this to advance our cause.
Mm-hmm. And Sandy?
Well, I think when we look at the mission of area agencies on aging and villages, they are so aligned, to ensure that people can age well at home and in the community. That being said, I think there is, and we are so pleased to be partnering with the villages on a new publication that'll be coming out talking about the collaborations between villages and area agencies on aging. And in doing so, being able to work together to expand service delivery to a broader group of people and expand the outcomes. To your point, Ramsey, it's the stories and the data on those collaborations and how they improve lives.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, I see this question from Kathy in here.
Yeah.
You want to take that one?
Yeah, and it ties in with Janet Crane's a little bit too. We have a lot of villages, and Sandy just touched on the leveraging resources guide that's coming out tomorrow. But, getting the word out, and Karyne, I hear you loud and clear, but we need communities to embrace villages. And that means grassroots embedded, whether it's faith-based, which we are starting to dip into because they can't take care of their own as much. But the funding and looking at potential funding for government. And Janet brings up, the Medicare Advantage programs. Well, for goodness sakes, if Medicare Advantage can reimburse for Uber and Lyft, what about our volunteers? We need, so I'd love for you to address that and how we can do the next steps. It's about the future of the village movement. Yeah, we're 20 years old. So now 10 years, where do you see us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to jump in on that one. I mean, in the sense that I see you integrating with everybody because you start at the closest level to people, and I think it's a question of being able to better understand and make the connections because, the level of commitment on the part of all the people who work in the associations that are represented here today is remarkable, but so is the commitment of the village movement and the people who work in those individual villages. It's remarkable. I know them. I've been to a number of them. I see how they operate. But it's the question now of broadening out and making it clearer to a wider sector of people what that movement is all about. How'd you build it? What's been successful? Take your best practices, put them out there. And I think you'll find a lot of interest. It's just a matter of pushing out the message. Or as Peter said before, it's time to seize the moment, right? Anybody else comments from my colleagues here on that question?
I think the other thing that I would add, and I mentioned it earlier, a lot of the discussion here on this panel has been at the national level, But please don't forget about the state and local level, especially working with your county commissions and your city councils, because a lot of aging services are funded and supported at the state and local level, and you're close to them. You know your elected officials at the local level. Meet them, greet them, make sure that they know about what you're doing in the village movement.
Thank you, Sandy. Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to ask in the 3 minutes or so we have left, and I'll try to say this literally, okay? Any last words, limited to 5 or less, from this panel? So Karyne, since you're smiling the most, why don't you go close us out with your last thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Villages for inviting me to be a participant in this. And I hope that those that are listening will reach out to us and we become partners and better partners. Second of all, I always learn so much with my colleagues. It's not, I mean, we're all fighting in the same battle, but I tell you, we don't get a chance to really do side by side all the time. So I always learn so much by listening to all of you. So I want to thank all my colleagues on this panel too, because it always, you know, enlightens me to a lot of things that, you know, I may not necessarily directly deal with. So thank you. And thanks again to Villages. And Bob, always.
Yeah, thanks, Karyne. Katie?
First, I'd just like to thank Barbara and thank the network of villagers, because you are really making a difference in so many people's lives and in communities. It seems to me the secret sauce of Villages is at the intersection of community engagement and connections. And that is so important in a society like ours right now, which is so divided. So thank you to the Villages for all you do. And we're happy to help support in any way we can.
Wonderful. Sandy?
Well, again, echoing, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for doing the publication that focuses in on collaboration between Villages and AAAs. And I believe that in the children's world, it says it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I believe that that is true as people age. And I think you have the perfect name. I think it's the perfect partnership with everybody involved. And we look forward to working closer with you moving forward.
Right. Peter?
I echo everyone's sentiments. I'm really grateful to the Village movement, because I know so many of you are ASA members and you've supported ASA, and let's find ways to collaborate even further. And so, you know, I hope you reach out to me or to ASA, and I'm grateful to share the stage with so many of you. It's great to see all of you.
And Ramsey?
Well, thank you so much for being in community together and being united in our fight to ensure aging well for all. We consider you and all the community-based organizations working to ensure all can age well as partners. And so pleased to be in this movement and effort together. See us as an ally, an advocate, and let's seize this moment together to ensure all can age well.
Well, I will, I guess, close, unless maybe Barbara's going to close, but I'll close from the panel perspective with, you know, my thoughts. I mean, I'm proud to have worked with Barbara almost from the beginning when she started. And, you know, I've made it a point to try to understand more about the whole network and what it does. But they're at a crossroads right now, and a positive crossroads. Okay, the opportunity is there for integration into the wider spectrum. Yes, this is a national panel, but at the end of the day, you know, everything revolves around local, and it should. So I too, I commend Barbara for choosing this panel and for having dedicated this much time in her conference to this session. I think it says a lot about her leadership and her interest in wanting to broaden the reach of the network. And I want to thank each of you on the panel for doing an outstanding job. I mean, you know, I'm not just blowing smoke here. You guys did a great job, and thank you. And thanks for having us, Barbara. So I'll leave it to you.
Well, I want to thank every one of you. It has been my pleasure. And, you know, the goal is to scale our movement, but this is a great start, and we love being invited to the table. We've just been invited to be a part of LCAO, and we're excited about those opportunities, telling our villages to be more advocates, and really, and Sandy, to your point, local, shop local, talk local. There's lots of states out there that are putting in their master plans, the village movement and the whole, model for aging. And so with your support, I think we are on a great track. And I thank you, Bob, always. One last thing, I just heard recently that there's going to be a select committee on aging on the House side. Is that true?
Well, somebody's trying to get one done, but it hasn't passed yet, but they're working on it. I know that much.
Well, we'll be lobbying for that one. Okay. Thank you all very much. We enjoyed, and everything will be saved as chat. Thank you, our panelists, for attending today.
And thank you, Steve and Eddie, too. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, Steve, Eddie,
All right.
appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks.
I know.
Great. All right. That was really a great panel. Okay, Barbara, so we have 15 minutes.
We have about 15 minutes until we have the exercise class coming on. So I think
Great.
today,
I got a
right
little
now,
15-minute countdown timer I can put on the
right.
screen.
And if you want to go ahead and throw those polls up, that would be great.
Oh, good idea. Okay, so let me get this together here. And okay, I will share my screen and I'll put those polls up or I'll put the first poll up. And folks, this is just a poll to give the board an idea about the future conference, potentially doing something in person. So I'm going to launch this poll while we wait for the next session. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay.